I'm Eric Marr. I'm a UC Davis graduate from 1980 to 84, and then I finished up in 86, 87. So it's many years ago now. I'm an Asian American Studies minor, but I took Black Studies or African American Studies and Chicano Studies from Davis, and I now teach Asian American Studies at San Francisco State on our 50th anniversary. And I was the supervisor of the Richmond District in San Francisco, which is the city, it's like a city council and a county board of supervisors. And I finished up a couple years ago, but I grew up in Sacramento. I still feel this is home, and I visit my mom and relatives here, even though I live out in San Francisco. I grew up here. My roots are Sacramento, fourth generation Chinese American. Mom, born and raised, actually Cortland, then Sacramento, so it's Sacramento Delta. Born in 62, so I grew up in the 60s and 70s here in Sacramento. But a lot of my family's been active in the Asian Community Center here. But our sister was in APA, the Asian American Political Alliance, which formed around the Third World Strike at UC Berkeley. They helped SF State form the Asian American Political Alliance at San Francisco State. That was the first time a Pan-Asian political term, Asian American, was used as opposed to individual ethnic groups, Chinese American, Vietnamese American. And the Asian American Political Alliance was also, as author Stanford leader Jeff Chang says, it was also a term, Asian American, that was about picking a fight because you're asserting your political independence. My sister brought some of that consciousness back to us. I remember her grabbing all the blankets in our house when we were growing up in the late 60s, probably around 1970, where the blankets would go to Alcatraz for the indigenous Native American people who were occupying Alcatraz from November of 69 to, I think, till like late 1970, I think. By the 80s, I began to connect more, but when I came into contact with the Chinese Progressive Association, my brother became active in the Asian Student Union at Berkeley. I became active in the Asian American Studies and some of the Asian student groups at Davis. There was Maga Kapatid, the Filipino student group. There was an Asian American coalition that I was kind of a part of, but it was really the Asian American Studies library and kind of connection with the department that kept me connected with different groups. I went to Davis in 1980 hoping to be a veterinarian, but by taking my first Asian American Studies class in 83 or 84, it changed my life because I wanted to learn more about a lot of issues, from Vincent Chin's killing and anti-Asian violence to immigrant rights and English only, and lots of things that were happening in the early 80s period when I started as a student. I was used to heavy Chinese American, Japanese American people around me in Sacramento, South Sacramento, where I grew up, Greenhaven, South Sacramento area, where there was a lot of diversity, but Davis felt like very white. And I was active in the radio station. I was like a DJ at KDVS for years, and I dabbled with wanting to be a music major. I would take composition classes and other things, but when I took my first Asian American Studies class in 1983, early 84, it just grabbed me and it changed the direction I was going to go in. I think one of the main things about Asian American Studies, the faculty were amazing. I was so lucky to have George Kagawada, Yasao Fujimoto. Peter Leung was another mentor, and there were a few others of the early Asian American Studies era. And George Kagawada was the main chair at the time, Japanese American sociologist, who taught about Japanese American internment in the US concentration camps of the World War II era, but also about Locke, Walnut Grove, and Isleton Chinese American communities, and how community development has to be centered on the people and families there and not tourist-driven industries in cities and small towns. So I learned a lot about community. And one of my other professors was Isao Fujimoto, whose very old now, but still, I think, an inspiration to many in Asian American Studies. Besides taking the classes, it made me think about Vincent Chin is a Chinese American, 27 years old, young guy that looked like my family members who was killed in Detroit in June 19th, 1982. It really was like a wake-up call for me, but it got me to think about my own immigrant family roots. Though I'm fourth generation on my mom's side, my dad was born in Toisan, and I knew nothing about my dad or mom's background, or very little. I didn't know about my grandma's name even, as I had Asian American Studies classes where we would have to talk about our family members. So I had to kind of ask and start to kind of ask questions more to my family. So it got me to open up about myself, but also learn about politics and interactions of Chinese and other people of color. So learning was all around me, and I think Asian American Studies really opened me up to a lot of learning about myself and what I wanted to do. I became the editor of the Third World Forum newspaper. It was definitely a third world solidarity, people of color, and radical kind of more revolutionary nationalist politics of that era. But by the early 80s, it had become more of a, I would call it a liberal kind of promoting of diversity type paper. My politics were more radical than that, and I work with a group of people, but I think I really did build a core of people that turned it back into a third world forum. One of my classes taught in Asian American Studies, probably in '84, they were large classes and broken up into smaller groups with TAs, and Joe Fong, who was the leader of the Joe Boys, was one of the TAs in the class. But it was enjoyable learning from other people. The TAs were just as important as George was as the sociologist teacher for us. I remember we would have a lot of great discussions in the classes, and our teacher, George Kagewata, would invite us all over to his house. And it's the first time I had kimchi, and just being interested in other Asian ethnic groups, but even knowing the subtle but also distinct differences between groups was really important. Other teachers, Asao Fujimoto, had classes where I remember I would have to go somewhere and then look around and look under a table or look at things from totally different perspectives like he did when he was a young person. But I remember seeing the world very differently from different perspectives, especially from the bottom up. And then for George, it was about building community and not just learning from your teacher, but learning from who's around you. But I also realized that if I wanted to be a teacher, I would learn from the students as much as I would try to help guide them as well. But I think it was the approach of teaching that was joyful, and it made me feel like I was learning about myself while I was also learning about others. So it's that empowerment feeling. So my takeaways from my experience, so what I learned from Asian American Studies was how theory can be so useful if you try to apply it to today's conditions and then constantly reflect on it and revise it so that it doesn't become dogma or something that you blindly follow because other people said it works. And I also am very jaded about glorifying different revolutionary movements now. Like the Asian American movement had all kinds of problems, from women being subordinated and not allowed to show leadership, to ethnic interfighting where the dominant Toisan Chinese Americans dominate with Japanese Americans, sometimes to the detriment of Southeast Asians and Pacific Islanders, to even more recent Chinese immigrants from different areas of China. But I think another, besides the Hong Kong protests now, and you were just mentioning the Taiwan Sunflower movement, to other movements, I'm really more open to learning about new struggles that especially young people are leading, and as an older guy now, trying to really learn from them. So I've learned a lot from you. And one of the most earth-shattering, or at least shattering for me, besides the Tiananmen Square June 4th, 1989 incidents that changed my view of China. The Burma treatment of Muslim refugees, the Rohingya refugees, and Buddhist oppression of Islamic Muslim refugees and immigrants, to me, is another earth-shattering thing about not glorifying even Asian spirituality or other ways of mindfulness, which I had been doing. So I'm trying to understand more of the political context of how even Buddhists can be oppressive to other refugees as we deal with our political crisis in the U.S. with the Trump administration right now, and the border wall to the horrible concentration camps for immigrants at the border right now. So my whole worldview is constantly, I think, changing, but I'm really trying hard to learn from the younger people's movements. And it's hard as a teacher because I have a certain way of teaching like my teachers did, but I'm constantly having to try to change it to make it a little bit more fun, interesting, and useful for my current students right now. I'm a dad of a 19-year-old too, so I keep having to think about what would my daughter think if I'm just trying to pretty much ram down her throat different thinking that I thought was useful for me, but I'm now trying to think about what are kind of fun things to do in the classroom that get people to develop critical thinking, media literacy, and other creative skills so that they could be leaders of new movements for tomorrow, that I'll be able to just kind of rest in my retirement soon. Yeah.